Everybody gets, very hung up on the number, like the valuation number. But I tell everybody, really, it's about finding the right match and then just coming up with the right structure for buyer and seller to make it work.
Well, hello and welcome to another great guest interview here on the Profit with Law podcast. I'm Moshe Amsel, your host, and I know this is a great episode, even though we haven't recorded it yet, because we have a repeat guest, and not only a repeat guest, but somebody who I feel like I just had the conversation yesterday with, but his previous episode was released fairly recently. We actually put it out on September 5th, 2024. We're recording this on December 3rd, 2024. I don't know when this episode will be released. I have a feeling it's going to be fairly soon, because we kind of used up our pre-recorded inventory going into year end. But the exciting thing is that we had a conversation, and we had a great conversation, but we left a huge question mark in the air. And I think that it's really important for us to come back and close the loop on that. So back on episode, what was this? Episode 447. The title of the episode is Everything You Need to Know About Buying and Selling Law Firms with Tom Lenfestey, Part 1. So we already knew we were going to be doing a Part 2. We called it Part 1. And you can access that through our short link of profitwithlaw.com/447. So you can go back and listen to that. But I had Tom here on the podcast, and he has he's been brokering law firms for a decade, but he's created this marketplace called the Law Practice Exchange, where firms can go to buy and sell their practice. And actually, Tom, as I'm standing here behind the microphone talking to you, I'm realizing that one of our fractional CFO clients is in the market for a law firm, and I totally forgot about your your marketplace when having that conversation with them. So totally going to go back and bring that up later. But we talked about how to sell your firm. What is the way that these sales are structured, all of that stuff. But what we didn't talk about is the valuation. What's the firm worth? And I think part of that valuation conversation is really what I do, and in my wheelhouse of being a fractional CFO for people, is that positioning the firm for sale. I think that too many firm owners don't realize how the value is dictated, and therefore they think, because I have a practice that's doing XYZ, it should be worth a ton of money. But when we look under the hood and everything's being done by the firm owner, operator, and when you take that person out, there's not much value there. Suddenly the value goes away, or there's a bunch of turnover, or the numbers are in a downward projection. There's so many different things that could be happening that you feel like you've got something to sell, but a buyer coming in is going to look at it and say, I don't really want this, or this is not worth anything close to what you think it's worth. I'm only willing to pay X. So I think part of the valuation conversation is really helping people understand what are the things that they need to do to kind of get ready to sell, or when you're going to buy, to know what to look for so that you're not paying too much for something that really isn't worth it. And that's where I think this conversation can go. And I have some background on the financial side with this, so I think it's going to be a great way for us to kind of tee off of each other to hone in on all these different points. But really, people who are listening to this, if you're not looking at buying a firm, if you're not looking at selling a firm, this is still an episode you want to pay attention to, because everything we're going to talk about is going to be directly related to how you can make your firm a better firm, more efficient, more profitable, because doing the things to prepare for sale is exactly what you need to do to be more successful, to have better cash flow, to have more repeatable business. So I'm excited to jump into this conversation. Tom, welcome back to the Profit with Law podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Moshe. Thanks for having me back again. Excited to talk about this and do a little bit deeper dive on, truly, as you said, what makes value in a law firm? And I think you hit, a couple of those points right on their head. But the overall aspect is things that you do today to promote exit value, right? To really, implement things that are going to help you for when you're ready to sell. They're going to create more profit for you today. They're going to create a better law firm for you to own and manage today. So it's a lot of things of focusing on your business, which is your law firm, working with great advisors like you and your team, right, is going to help you become a more valuable law firm when you're ready to exit and sell. And so it's, do things now, regardless of what your timing is. And then, as you mentioned, for our buyers out there, just understanding really what is it in a law firm you're looking to buy, right? And I think that's a core concept of what is that you really want to focus in on and truly value in the law firm target to make sure you get it.
Awesome. And folks, just to kind of set the stage here, I think it'll be easier for our conversation to be focused on the seller, just to kind of talk about what are the things we could do to improve or make the price better. But just take the flip side. If you're the buyer, just take the flip side of the conversation. So we're not going to paint the picture both ways throughout the episode. But I have a feeling that we're going to lean more towards the seller as we discuss this. So Tom, the first question I have for you, and I think this is gonna lean into that it depends and start this whole conversation, is is the way the firm is valued different based on the practice area, based on the type of clientele that you have, those kinds of things? Like, does that change from practice area to practice area?
It can, based on, everything that we do being the marketplace leader, helping buy or sell firms. We tell everybody we are doing market valuations. And so in the live market for buying and selling law firms, we have different buyer demand for practice areas. We have practice areas that as of today are, in higher demand, or they're built different and easier to transfer. A year from now, that might look a little bit different, right? And so, yes, from the standpoint of practice areas can play an important role, geographic locations, is this a booming, robust geographic location with lots of demands for legal services, or is it in decline, right? And so those factors, even though you're running just your firm the right way, can definitely have an impact. But the core focus, of course, is, making sure your business model is as strong as it can be.
Yeah, I think that also, like, the book of business, like a lot of law firms are like, well, I've been in business for 20 years, so I've got 20 years of clients that, that when I'm selling my whole book of business. But if you're doing, say, criminal defense or estate planning and probate, right? Like those are one-hit wonders, right? Like maybe you've got some, I mean, some criminals are repeat offenders, right? They come back and back, over and over again. But often you're dealing with somebody once and you're never dealing with them again. So what's the value of that book of business versus somebody who's got business clients? And they're coming, I mean, they've got work year round every year over and over again, right? So I think that the practice area is going to lend to some of those things when we start talking about what drives value, where, do I have an established marketing engine that's bringing consistent leads in and consistent cases in? Do I have, a sales team closing that versus, do I have a book of business? Those pieces are going to change from practice area to practice area because certain practice areas you're just not going to have. That book of business is not going to be a ton of value. It'll bring referrals maybe, but it's not necessarily bringing that repeat business.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect statement, Moshe. It's really, you can we've had good criminal defense practices that, there are repeat clients for criminal defense, of course, just like family law and otherwise, right? They're like, oh, we don't get a lot or we get more than we should. But at the end of the day, if that firm is, they're not really strong on the brand or the marketing or the systematic intake, that's a little bit tougher, right? Your value goes down. To your point is they've got a good book, but how they really have built that book into a business is a little on the weak side. And so the transferable value vision that a buyer would see is a little bit tougher. And so you can have thriving, though, criminal defense practices like our personal injury practices that have built just great brands, digital marketing. They're so strong, their data and everything else, that's really going to make them a star in the market because they can show you where they get their clients and how they're going to get them systematically, whether they own the firm or you own the firm.
Yeah. So Tom, you've been doing this for a decade. You get somebody who comes in, they're looking to sell their firm, or you get somebody coming in looking to buy a firm. Where are the first places that your eyes are going? Like what are the first things you're checking out to kind of be like, hey, you've got something here to sell, or you've got some work to do?
Yeah, we're going, of course, to the financials, right? So we tell everybody that the three core concepts of when we look to value a firm is your EBITDA, right? Moshe, to you and I, that means a lot. To others, it may not. But at the end of the day, it's really your financials, right? We try to get down to true owner's benefit. What is the benefit of you as an owner owning this? That can be kind of a normalized profit, anything else. But for a lot of firms, you're looking at revenues, you're looking at case inventory, you're looking at the total financial structure of the firm to see what they have done and hopefully what would continue, what could be transferred. But the first concept really is the financials. How strong is the firm? So, at the end of the day, people ask like, well, how can I, increase value of the firm? There's lots of things that we can talk about on that, but the core concept is, the healthier your firm is on revenues and profitability, the more valuable your firm will be, right? Because we have firms that are doing, $50,000 in profit, and we have firms doing 50 million in profit. If you're a 50 million profitable firm, you're of course going to be more valuable, as you go forward. So growing to that healthy status and everything else. The other concepts are really like your uniqueness, which we call your intellectual property. It's your brand. It's how you've made it, potentially harder for somebody to compete with you because of what you've built on your brand. Our personal injury attorneys are great at this about, their branding, right? They're constantly branding, building that brand marketing. Moshe, you and I were joking about that before because we both have our logos, in the corner of this, for live filming. But it's really that uniqueness. And then the third piece on, value that we're going to focus in on is systems. How much as a firm does it run on systems, or how much are you, the owner, having to push everything, right? You kind of open with that. If you're the owner doing everything, that is going to devalue your firm because you have to transition over time and there's risk to that, right? And so financials, your, uniqueness, your brand, and then your systems.
How There's a few questions that came to mind, but when we're trying to like in the financials, we're trying to extrapolate certain things. We all know that uh, owners bury stuff in there, right? Like, okay, I take a trip to Italy with the family. I meet up with some friends over there, call it a mastermind, and boom, it's a business expense, right? And this is not meant to give anybody tax advice. I am a tax accountant, and I'm not condoning or saying whether this is right or wrong, but we all know that's happening. There's other stuff that's not necessarily buried in there, but it's there. For example, the owner's taking a salary. The owner is potentially got a 401k or a defined benefit plan that they're contributing in to kind of increase their retirement nest egg. Is there a process to go in and kind of like figure out like what's the total owner benefit, and then pull that out, and then is that considered profit, or you're like, okay, we need to replace this person, what would it cost to replace that person, and then kind of insert that instead?
Yes, to both, right? So to your first part is absolutely how you run your business, your law firm is personal to you, right? And that really goes to, as you kind of said, a mastermind in Italy that I take as an expense, right? The next owner of the firm may not go to Italy for a mastermind and see that as a reasonable business expense. So that would be added back, right? That's kind of would be profit to you if you hadn't gone and taken that expense. And the same things with other perks and owner benefits. Those go to kind of fill the bucket of this is the true, right? You took it as a business expense, but it's just because you wanted to take it as a business expense. It wasn't a necessary expense. Maybe you did it for tax reasons. Maybe you just did it for personal, but all of that can go to really, fill that bucket of owner's benefit. But then to your second point, Moshe, you're exactly right. The next piece is, Well, if we've added back your salary, and this is probably of other what I'll call brokers, business brokers, what we see all the time, they just add back owner's salary. So if, Moshe runs a law firm, it's doing $1 million. Moshe's, in there billing, doing all the client work, everything else, and you pay yourself 200,000, they add it back. That's proper because Moshe decided he wanted to pay himself 200. But the real question is, who do you hire to replace Moshe, right? Who is that replacement salary? And I'm sure you work with your clients on, you should pay yourself a fair salary for the work you do in your business, right? And so we call that a replacement cost. And so if you decide that, yes, I paid myself 200, but it only is going to cost 150 to replace the legal work and the production that I do, then again, it can be an add of 200, a subtraction of 150, right? But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is add back those perks, reduce out the replacement cost and those other things to get to a normalized financials, right? Truly to say, this is how Moshe ran it, but if anybody ran it, this is what the financials would look like. And sometimes that actually takes our financials healthier. Sometimes it takes it, less healthy because of just how you've chosen to run the firm, anything else. But overall, it is normalized financials. Doesn't matter who the owner is, really to get to a point of really what does this business, this law firm, kick off as true owner benefit. And then the last point on that is, clean data, clean financials. As an attorney, CPA, Moshe, like yourself, like again, I'm all about creativity and finding, those tax breaks. But I can tell you, we have lots of law firm owners that, have zero profit for years and bury stuff in their, financials. And those practices are really hard to sell because banks won't touch them if you don't show a healthy profit. And for good tax planning can sometimes lead to bad exit strategies, right? Because it's going to limit really what you do if you don't have clean books.
How many years back are we looking? Like if somebody wants to sell, and they've been running at zero profit, and we can talk about profit numbers in a moment, but um do they need to change the story in their financials for 3 years, for 1 year, for 5 years? What's the time frame that would really give them max value?
Yeah, we always want 3 years of financials or 2 years plus year to date. We're sitting in December, right? If we don't have a complete year. If you do have volatile financials, us or, a bank may request 5 because they really want to see that. But if you're really looking to change your ways of kind of cleaning up your books, showing a healthier profit, for your future exit, I would say 2 to 3 years is a great timeline to do that. The biggest thing that we actually run into is, making sure that, projection is going up. What we run into sometimes is attorneys who have waited a little longer to exit, and they actually have, they've been slowing down. And so their practice revenues have been slowing down. And then, we get and we talk to them, they're like, yeah, I've been going from, 5 days to 4 days or 4.5. And yeah, my production's down, but just tell the bank, for the buyer, just tell them it's just because I started taking a day off, right?
Right.
Banks don't buy it, and most buyers won't buy it either. And so it's really impairs your ability to truly, bring funding to the deal or anything else from that side. So, keeping that good, healthy balance, or to your point, if you're going to change your books and how it looks, getting a good 2, 3 years of, steady projected growth would be great.
Yeah. Do you run into firms that are taking cash payments and those are not on the books and they're trying to like value it based on including those payments?
Less. I mean, over a decade of doing this, definitely ran into a good number of those, especially some in like criminal defense and otherwise, which can be, just different lower cost, fees. But for the most part, I'd say it's pretty clean and everybody paying by credit cards and whatnot keeps it pretty accountable.
Yeah, I think immigration's a practice area that has a larger percentage of cash payments, and I know in the work that I do, I've run into clients who are taking cash payments, and whether or not those are making it to the books, I plead the fifth, but it seems like that might be a practice that's out there.
Yeah, and if it is, it goes back to the same thing. If you can't report it, if you can't show it, right, it's it's great for your income tax planning now, but it's going to impact your exit value later. And, we've been through those, and as much, kind of intermediary and brokerage, courses and training, it's real common in other industries. I think law probably has certain places for it. But I think for the most part, what we run into in law and Moshe, you probably see this too, is just, those that are trying to do the right things, right? Law firm owners running small law firms, but they haven't aligned with a good team like yours, like a good accountant, fractional CFO. And so they haven't really been monitoring the books. We get into, looking at the books, we're like, well, why was there this really large payment in December, for like 700,000, and then this, and they're like, oh, I don't know why that was. Well, if you don't know why it was, I'm going to guarantee you a buyer's going to ask why there was a 700,000. And then it comes out it was a bookkeeping correction because the bookkeeper didn't know what they're doing and everything else. But it just doesn't show well. So really having clean, reviewed, and understood, just, from even a baseline, you don't have to get real complex. Financial bookkeeping is huge.
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that we find that even when you have a bookkeeper on staff, even when you have a professional bookkeeping company doing it, there's stuff that slips through. For example, I have one client where, the 401k deduction that was being taken, that employees took from their paycheck, was being booked as a liability and paid out that way, and correctly. But then the employer match that they paid out, which was paid once a year, was being booked the same way. So they were losing the benefit of that expense. Now, from a sales perspective, that makes them more profitable, but that affected them negatively in the tax perspective, right? Their tax bill was higher, because of the way that was booked. Stuff like that, where it's easy for that mistake to be made, but having somebody go through and find those errors and fix them. Another one where, and this is common, some credit card processors, they'll process the revenue instead of giving you the net amount minus their fee. They'll give you the gross amount and then take a withdrawal of their fee. And some people erroneously leave those withdrawals, those fees, in revenue. So it lowers how much revenue you're reporting, when more revenue is better for you. And there's no reason that shouldn't be in a separate expense category. It's perfectly fine. It doesn't affect the profit, but it changes the story of your top line number.
Absolutely. I mean, you and I probably could just do a podcast on, things we've seen that scare us and keep us up at night. One of the most egregious that I saw from a bookkeeping accounting side, Moshe, was a personal injury firm that was reporting, essentially if they won a case for $1 million, their accountant and bookkeeper had convinced the owner, like, okay, we report 1 million. And then when we cut our check, to, our client, we deduct that amount and everything else, which, of course, if you're settling cases, but those aren't your legal fees and,
Correct.
everything else. And so for 3, 5 years, they had been way over reporting their income. And, when everything squares out at the end, but they come in and they're like, hey, we've got a, $20 million a year firm. It's like, no, you don't. You have a like $6 million,
Right.
it's so
Correct.
far less than that. But it's just, they had really believed that was their gross revenues, when in essence, you're probably, also improperly trust
Correct.
accounting, right? For
Correct.
all
It's a major ethics violation. You probably lose your license for doing it
Mhm.
that way.
Right.
So yeah, that's clearly a mistake. But I mean, look, trust accounting is a whole nother issue, right? Like make sure that your trust accounting matches
Right.
and is squared away before you try to sell it. You don't want somebody looking at it and be like, well, are you reporting this and a totally different number here? Like, why is your trust balance different than, than your book balance for your trust account? So,
One
um,
one of the things, Moshe, just to mention on how it impacts valuation for trust accounting is, you were mentioning kind of different practice areas. If you're a personal injury firm, right, you're working for free until, you get cases in your trust account, shake free liens, and then finally get paid. But you also mentioned immigration. We have some immigration that are taking fees in advance, right? And, some of them are just taking fixed fees, some of them are putting it in trust. But there's this balance of knowing the billing practice. And you kind of mentioned if you're a buyer, but if you're a seller, your cases in inventory can be an asset like personal injury because those are future revenue, or they can be a liability, meaning you've already taken the fee and there's a lot of work still to be done. And that has an impact in law firm valuation, right? So if you took the fee up front and you've got 6 months, 12 months of work to be done, at the time you sell your firm, that might be something you have to credit the cost of completing that work back to the buyer. And we see that a lot in immigration because those are longer, timeline cases sometimes, but they're fixed fee taken up front. And on the reverse, like personal injury, you're selling future revenue. You truly have cases on the books that should, become some form of future revenue that you've put most of the work or some of the work in. And so knowing the difference on that, whether you're a seller or a buyer, can impact your value.
I imagine sometimes the sale in those contingency-based practices, the sale might have some of those cases still pay out to the previous owner separately from the value of the business. So you would have to tell me, but in my mind, that would make sense.
We only do that really with like true outliers, like those cases that are like the 3, 4 year cases that have been hanging around, the work's been completed. Maybe there's an estate lien that, is just taking multiple years to shake free. The reason why we try to do it with just those outliers versus like, hey, here's this really big case that I settled that I'd like to keep. We try to roll that into the purchase structure because, if you're a law firm owner of a PI practice, and you have a big case every 3 years, which we see a lot, right? Like every third year is a really good year. That's what you're selling. And if we're valuing a firm based on a 3 year, average, to pull that case out of it will decrease your value. It just kind of muddles it. You can definitely do it, but it muddles it because if you kept owning the firm, you would deposit that and you would, pay off expenses that you've incurred. The financials would look healthier. And so we really try to encourage, if you're going to sell your business, then those cases are part of it. It can definitely be accounted for in the purchase structure versus selecting out, like, oh, well, this big case over here, I want to keep this. But we do get, especially on the, litigation firms, hey, I'm, 2 weeks away from getting this $1 million payout. When we usually say, then wait to sell or wait to close until you, get that fee in that you need and kind of carry it forward from there.
Now, when somebody's selling a firm, somebody's buying a firm, are they're typically getting the entire entity with the assets, with the liabilities? Is that typically how it's done? So they're not just buying the name or just buying the marketing structure or just buying, because I know, I mean, in the real world that there's all kinds of ways to structure a deal, right? Like a lot of people don't want to take the actual entity because I don't know how compliant you've been with taxes. I don't know if you have any past employees that are still going to sue the business for something. There's a lot of unknowns there, where what I'm really buying is I'm really buying your marketing structure. I'm really buying the people that you have working for you, or the systems of process you've created, not necessarily the whole entity. What's typically done when you're working with clients, brokering these transactions, as far as how these are structured?
Yeah, most want to do it with, an asset purchase. So most buyers are looking to, buy the brand, buy, the systems, buy the team, buy everything good about your firm and leave everything, like you mentioned, could be risk or liabilities, potentially with you as of the date of closing. So if you didn't file taxes, for 2 years or whatever else, or you didn't file a certain tax payment, that doesn't come back to be demanded on the buyer. They just bought the assets, they bought your name, they bought everything else, and they either roll that into their existing firm, right? So if you have a great, brand name, great marketing, all of that continues forward, or they start their own, new law firm, and essentially run the brand out of there, filing a, DBA or a trade name kind of filing with the bar or otherwise to do that. And again, Moshe, as you kind of mentioned, it's usually because they want to, mitigate risk. The other big thing is, I'm sure you've seen this with your clients, if you're doing an asset purchase, of a law firm, you get to deduct, and depreciate the amount that you're paying for that asset. Most law firms are goodwill. So over a 15-year period, if you spend $1 million, or make the math easy, $1.5 million, you get $100,000 deduction a year of what you pay. So when you do an equity, you don't get that deduction. And so most are looking to do asset purchases really to select out what they need to do that. And to most sellers, since it's goodwill, it's capital gains as well. And so it works out pretty well for the buyers and the seller side to have a good capital transaction where the seller stays like, hey, if there's something that pops up that I didn't do right while I was owning the firm, I'm responsible for that. But once the buyer takes over, they're responsible for activities and liabilities going forward.
So as far as getting a loan to finance the deal, right? Financing from a bank does it matter if you have an existing entity that you're buying with or you're starting a new one? Does that affect, whether somebody's willing to, to put up the financing for it?
Yeah, it doesn't matter other than banks love if you have other assets or income or, other things going for you. And I'll give an example. If you're looking to buy $1 million, law firm and you're out, you're leaving a firm to become an owner of a firm, like this is your goal is to go out and buy, or you were in-house counsel, now you're, going outside of it. The lenders that we work with, legal lenders, are going to look at that law firm first, that $1 million law firm, and make sure that's healthy and they see that as a viable, entity to finance, right? And then they're going to come to you, making sure, you've got experience, hopefully in this area, right? You're a licensed lawyer, all these other things that they're going to go through, and you don't have any bankruptcy, anything else. So as long as that firm is healthy and as long as you're a good borrower, no problem. However, if let's move to the next, you already own a law firm doing 5 million a year in revenue and you're going to pick up that $1 million firm, they will also then say, man, you're an even better borrower because you have a firm that, we can of course use as part of our lending, our approval through underwriting that's really healthy in its own right. And even if that $1 million target that you're looking at isn't as healthy as they'd like it to be, you're just a stronger overall. You've got more collateral, more borrowing power, as part of it. So you don't need it, but it definitely helps. And if your goal, which we're seeing a lot of now, Moshe, is, a roll-up strategy. So a lot of firms that build their firm, they want to go out and strategically in geographic areas or based on practice areas, and they want to acquire and roll up. And so having, a firm already existing to leverage, banks are much more excited to lend you once, lend to you again, right? They can really leverage that and, make it work for you.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to the financial conversation. We talked about the value of EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization for the nerds in the room. We talked about add backs, normalizing the financials so that we're basically removing the owner, putting in the replacement. What is a healthy number? And I'll preface this to say, when in my line of work, I mean, typically when somebody's coming in to work with me on the fractional CFO side, they're running at 10% or less in profit margin, usually 15 maybe. Anything above that, and they think that they're doing fine. The reality is that I mean, I go into clients and I say, I can get you to 30% plus. Like, I know that I can get a law firm to run at a 30% plus profit margin. What is the margins that you're seeing in the marketplace? How does that dictate to the selling price? Is there a target somebody should have if they're trying to get to the point where they're ready to sell? Let's talk about margin.
Yeah, and really when we talk about margin, we have to talk about like normalized after we've gone through the adjustments, everything else, because we've seen, law firm owners come in and say, hey, I run at a 30% margin, but they don't pay themselves. Like they don't pay themselves a salary, so we have to add back that cost or anything else from that side. But usually, most of what we're looking for is 20% or above in profit margin. The healthier it is under, true normalized financials, the better off that the sale will be. Once you get under that amount for your everyday, and we'll just call it an everyday, like, small law firm, like 1 to 2 owner law firm, the deals just get challenging because, all these deals are structured with the bucket of money that's left over, right? Which is our owner's benefit or our profitability. If you squeeze that and make that smaller and smaller, then there's less deal structuring to do, right? So an example of that is, $1 million revenue law firm who only makes $100,000, at a 10% margin. Out of that $100,000, a buyer's got to go, essentially borrow money, be able to pay that back, right? To pay you to do that. They've got to hire a replacement cost. They got to handle transition expenses. At the end of the day, the buyer's decision is always, do I buy and acquire? Is that my growth strategy? Or do I go spend $100,000 a year to market and grow? And if the squeeze becomes more and more, so at the end of the year, they're only making 20,000, why would they buy? Right? They would really rather just go spend the money on something that they know, a proven marketing strategy or, natural growth or otherwise. So the smaller that bucket gets, right, the tougher deals get to structure. Time can help us. We can stretch payments, we can do different things. But the healthier profit margins you have, the more deal opportunity and the more excited buyers are going to be, the more excited banks are going to be to lend on those deals. And, so to your point of getting them to 30% or above is beautiful. You're going to have a more valuable firm. You're going to have buyers that sometimes aren't themselves running at that margin. And so they would get excited over, looking at it as a strategic opportunity to take what you've been doing, potentially apply it to them, to really carry that forward. But at least 20%, and, it depends on scales. The larger firms, of course, 20% can look great, right? But the smaller firms, if you're below 20%, it just gets tougher. Absolutely.
Okay, so how is the selling price determined? Is it a multiple of earnings? Is it a multiple of revenue? Is it none of the above, all of the above? Like what's the calculation that goes into determining what the firm is worth?
Yep. We use various approaches and then we weight them. So we tell everybody, do we look to revenues? Yes. Do we look to earnings, to that net profit? Yes. We also look to your asset approach, which for most law firms, they don't have a ton of, tangible assets, that they could liquidate. But our case inventory firms do. And so like our plaintiff firms that have, millions of dollars of case inventory, that needs to be looked at and examined. And then we look at market comparables as well. So over a decade of doing this, we've got hundreds of market comps to basically compare deals against, and what does your PI firm sell for versus this other PI or criminal defense or estate planning firm. So we're looking at that. But what holds the day, Moshe, is truly earnings, right? Because at the end, that's most always going to be weighted the heaviest in any valuation model we do. And the reason for that is we structure deals like buyers and banks are going to structure deals. And buyers are going to look at how much money is going to be left over when I buy your business, your law firm, and put it under my reins, right? Like how much am I going to benefit from that once I take that over? That's the same from an internal buy-in, right? If you're trying to develop an internal succession, I tell everybody what that next generation is going to look at is when I buy, how is this going to benefit me so that I'm making more money? If I'm not, they're probably less likely to do that deal. And so the buyers are the same ways. They're looking to grow and they're looking to grow their revenues, sure, but they're looking to grow their earnings. So they want a buy-in structure that's going to have great earnings to them, a great return on investment to them after paying for the firm. Banks look at it the same way. After you make payment, after you borrow and pay the interest and everything else, what is left over and how big that margin is. And so overall earnings is what really carries it. On a multiple of those earnings from like a generic aspect, we see, our everyday firms somewhere between a 2 multiple and a 3 multiple of that. So if you're running $1 million firm and you're doing, let's say they're nice and healthy at, 30%, so they're doing 300,000, you can look and say, well, my floor on a 2 multiple is my firm's hopefully worth at least 600,000, right? And then go up from there. Some of our firms that get bigger, some of our firms that get so much better on systems or branding and profit margin, they break through our 3 multiple. But even at our very large, where private equity is involved in the funding aspect of it, anything else, they're really capping out at like a 4.5 to a 5 multiple right now. So law firms are definitely not the highest multiples across industries or anything else, but it's still a growing emerging market. And so many of our firms are still built on, personal brand and transition aspects.
And I might have missed it, but that multiple is on profit or on revenue?
Profit.
Profit.
Yep.
Okay. So when I help somebody get to 30% margin, and so they're running a $10 million firm, so now they're producing a $3 million profit. They might be able to turn around and sell that for somewhere between 3 and 5x that.
Correct.
Awesome.
Well, wait, 3 to 5x, 2 to 3x is what we were
Two
talking about.
two to three x. Well,
2 to 3x.
what was the examples that are going to be 4 to 5? The last thing you said.
Yeah, the 4 to 5 are really our large, outlier firms. So when I say large outlier, like we have a, 60 million a year, revenue firm running at about a 50% profit margin.
Hmm.
And so, if they're running at, 25 to 30 million in profit a year off of, double that in revenues. I mean, they built their own system software. They have multiple engineers working with them. That's where really to fund those deals, banks won't fund it. So you have to bring in private equity to at least fund those buy-ins and buyouts. And so as part of that, that's where you're really talking about a 4 to 5 multiple. But overall, we have not seen anything, above the 5 multiple in the market. And those are really reserved for the outliers. Your everyday firms, even those doing, 10 million in revenue, 3 million in profits, are probably going to max out at a 3 multiple.
Got it. All right. Really cool. Um, we're approaching the end. We still have a few more minutes. What haven't we discussed when it comes to valuing a firm, and where, besides for the financials, besides for the top line revenue, bottom line, income normalized, um, and besides for assets and inventory of, cases for our contingency based firms, or as you said, plaintiff firms, um, what are there any other areas where we're looking for valuation where somebody can say, hey, you're really buying something that's worth more?
Yeah, I think really what you're looking at, of course, is, you want to look at the transition risk of any book, right? Any business that you're looking to carry over. I mean, I always talk that, law firms traditionally are made up of personal value, like my personal goodwill, my network, the people I've known, just because that's how so many lawyers have built up their law firms, right? They've
Mhm.
gone to associations, conferences. They've done great work for clients who only refer back to that lawyer. But then you got to couple that with your firm goodwill, the value there. The firm goodwill, the website, the brand, the systems, the team, everything else, that moves very easily to another buyer. Your personal goodwill moves slowly. And it takes a little effort and it takes a little time and it takes participation by you and someone on the buyer side to do that after close, right? After you close and kind of, structure that. And that's really like, hey, this person bought my firm. I need to introduce them to my referral sources. This person bought my firm. I need to have them be involved in this association that has been a huge source of personal business, for me to do that. And so even though, I'm a big advocate of lessen that in your firm, focus more on building the firm value and goodwill and marketing and intake, it's very, common. We just see so many of the firms right now in the marketplace that are selling that have been built on a lot of personal, goodwill. And so that transition piece. And so when we go through the valuation exercise, that may diminish your value. It truly may, because a buyer is going to see that as a risk of sale, right? A risk of purchase. Tom was loved by this association, but the buyer may not be, right? That's how, the lawyer is going to see it or the buyer is going to see it. They want to believe they will be, but they see it as a risk of it not continuing. And so the value may come down, but really what we try to focus with our sellers and buyers on, that's where deal structures, right, and deal terms can really be modified to hopefully capture the value if it is there and it continues forward. And this can be in, earnouts or percentage payments or anything else, to basically be flexible to say, well, we're not sure this book of business, this that you get from this association or these referrals are going to transfer. But if they do, we'll pay you for them, right? I mean, that's the clear aspect. If the work comes in and the revenues are there, then sure, we'll help do it. That means the transition plan was successful. And, to our buyers and sellers, it's truly a win-win if you can focus on that. But you have to realize as a seller, if you've built your practice like that, it's got more risk to a buyer, right? They at least see it as a risk, the ownership transfer. And Moshe, just as an example, this even goes for, corporate clients that, are parts of this book. We had an attorney in the immigration space years ago who, had a large client who gave them lots of, HB1 visas, everything else to really just generate. And they're like, the client's been with me for 20 years. They're not going anywhere. They're not, right? It was a certain aspect that they're really not going anywhere. And then, buyers saw it as a risk. They turned down some offers. And then right before we were actually in due diligence, the client got bought by another kind of a, corporate restructure, and they lost the client. And that was, about a third of their business that they lost in that aspect, which, 20 some years tells you they're not going to lose it, and they lost it. So there's always that risk there, but the deal terms were modified and built in a way that that risk could be, kind of shared between the parties. And I think that's the key aspect.
Yeah, and I love thinking about it that way and looking at the deal structure because not everything is just what is the total amount I'm paying. It's what do I need to come up with cash? What do I need to get financing for? What's that financing going to cost? What if the seller will finance some of it? Then I don't have the cost of financing that. And all of those things do play a role. They are factors, and certainly makes it more possible for a buyer to be able to make the purchase, which might allow you to get somebody who's willing to take more of that risk.
Everybody gets, very hung up on the number, like the valuation number. But I tell everybody, really, it's about finding the right match and then just coming up with the right structure for buyer and seller to make it work. So if you're a firm that's been built purely on personal goodwill, and you're going to have maybe lesser value in the market, but if you find the best successor that's got a great team, does exactly like it's a perfect fit culturally, otherwise, and they're going to take what you've built and really they have more people to get the work done that's been overloading and everything else, you will outperform your valuation because your deal terms will be structured in a way to hopefully unlock that value and carry that forward. You don't have it right now under your current business model, but you can unlock it with the right, strategic successor, partner, anything else.
Awesome. This is a great place for us to kind of wrap things up here. This was a great conversation, Tom. Really appreciate you coming back for part two and allowing us to have this discussion. I think that it's really insightful to everybody, whether you're looking to buy or sell your firm right now, or just needing to understand what makes a business healthy. And you can kind of see that there's a lot of pieces to this puzzle, right? You need to have a team, and that team needs to be operating from a place of systems and processes. You need to have, a good, solid marketing foundation. If everything is built on relationships, nothing wrong with starting that way or building that way, but at some point, you need to be able to decouple from that. So maybe that's a place of opportunity for you to work on within your business, and then shoring up your financials, making sure that your books are clean, that you're getting good reports, that you're able to separate out the owner's compensation and look at it in a normalized way. When you're looking at your financials and seeing how you're doing, you should be looking at it from that lens. And I think that if you take those pieces that we've discussed, focusing on your margin and elevating your margin, and all of those other add-ons that are going to really help you structure and find a buyer that, when it's time to sell, those are all really good things for you to do when you're running your business, and great takeaways for you to just kind of walk away from this episode with. Tom, where can people go to perhaps dip their toe in looking at firms available for purchase or looking to sell? You've got your marketplace, but you broker deals. So tell people how to take the next step with you if they're interested in exploring this.
Yeah, absolutely. Come visit us at thelawpracticeexchange.com. That's thelawpracticeexchange.com. You can also direct link to the marketplace.law. That is where, the marketplace community is hosted. A lot of Moshe, what, we're about is it's just learning. Not everybody's ready to sell. Not everybody's ready to buy right now, but if we can help you as part of it to learn for when you're ready, that's a great aspect. So yeah, join us at thelawpracticeexchange.com and we look forward to having you there.
Awesome. And folks, if you want to explore what it's like to work with me and my team, whether it's from a coaching perspective, if you're early on in the process, you're a solo, you're looking to grow beyond yourself, you're looking to actually build a business that runs at a 30 to 40% profit margin. Interestingly, solos really often have 40 to 50% profit margins and look at their business and like, what's he talking about? I'm running really healthy. It's because you haven't really added the business expenses that it takes to run a business. You're basically doing everything yourself. But if you're looking to grow beyond yourself and build, one of these multi-million dollar firms that we're talking about, then we have a coaching program called the Law Firm Growth Elite, where we help law firm owners grow beyond themselves. You can find out more about that at profitwithlaw.com/elite. And if you're interested in looking into us working with you on a CFO capacity, we do fractional CFO services. Then you can go to profitwithlaw.com/strategy session, profitwithlaw.com/strategy session. Book a call with us. We'll spend some time with you and kind of talk over the strategy of what you need to do next in your business, and then also explore what it might look like to work together. Tom, really appreciate you being here. Folks, check out the Law Practice Exchange, and I'm definitely going to do that myself. I've got some clients who might be in the market. I want to kind of dip my toe in the water there and see what's up for sale, and if there's anything that they're specifically looking for. So I'm going to check it out myself. And we'll see. Well, I'm sure this is not the end of Tom on this podcast, because a lot of lawyers are becoming of age, right? Like it's time to start thinking about what's the next chapter of my life. There's going to be a lot of lawyers looking to exit. And unfortunately, a lot of lawyers just going and closing up shop. So keep your eyes out for that. That's actually an interesting thing. You're not going to see it on a marketplace. You're not, but if you know somebody is getting older in your community, and they might just close their doors, and then there's value there that you can have by just offering to take it over, and giving them something for it, even if it's just a piece of the future business. But it's all about opportunity. It's those networking groups, those things where you shake hands with people, you create those relationships, and you may just stumble into one of those opportunities. Tom, thank you very much. Take care, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode.